Hey friends, I am looking at myself in the camera and seeing that I look very windblown. It's getting ready to storm here and I've been outside working in some flowers this afternoon and my hair is a mess. But anyway, I'm going to read chapter 8 called Margalo of Stuart Little. Because he was so small, Stuart was often hard to find around the house. His father and his mother and his brother George seldom could locate him but just by looking for him. Usually they had to call him, and the house often echoed with cries of, "Stuart! Stuart!" You come into a room and he might be curled up in a chair, but you just wouldn't see him. Mr. Little was in constant fear of losing him and never finding him again. He even made him a tiny little red cap like hunters wear so that he could be seen easier. One day, when he was 7 years old, Stuart was in the kitchen watching his mother make tapioca pudding. He was feeling very hungry, and when Mrs. Little opened the door of the electric refrigerator to get something out, Stuart slipped inside to see if he could find a piece of cheese. He supposed, of course, that his mother had seen him, and when the door swung shut, and he realized he was locked in, it surprised him greatly. Oh no, she really didn't see him. Wonder what's going to happen. There's a picture of him in the refrigerator. Ooh, I hope they find him before too long. I bet he will get really cold. "Help!" he called. "It's dark in here. It's cold in this refrigerator. Help! Let me out! I'm getting colder by the minute." But his voice was not strong enough to penetrate the thick wall. In the darkness, he stumbled and he fell into a saucer of prunes. The juice was cold and Stuart shivered and his teeth chattered together. It wasn't until half an hour later that Mrs. Little again opened the door and she found him standing on the butter plate, beating his arms together to try and keep warm and blowing on his hands and hopping up and down. "Mercy!" she cried. "Stuart, my poor little boy." "How about a nip of brandy?" said Stuart. "I'm chilled to the bone." But his mother made him some hot broth instead, and she put him to bed in his cigarette box with the doll's hot water bottle against his feet. Even so, Stuart caught a very bad cold, and that turned into bronchitis, and Stuart had to stay in bed for almost 2 weeks. During his illness, the other members of the family were extremely kind to Stuart. Mrs. Little played tic-tac-toe with him. George made him a little soap bubble pipe and a bow and an arrow. Mr. Little made him a pair of ice skates out of 2 paper clips. One cold afternoon, Mrs. Little was shaking her dust cloth out the window when she noticed a small little bird lying on the windowsill, apparently dead. She brought it in and she put it near the radiator. In a short while it fluttered its wings and opened its eyes. It was a pretty little hen bird. It was brown with a streak of yellow on her breast. The Littles didn't agree on what kind of bird she was. Now here's a picture of Stuart sick in the bed. You can see his ice skates that his dad made, and there's his bubble pipe that George made for him. And then here's a picture of the bird that they found. "She's a wall-eyed vireo," said George scientifically. "I think she's more like a young wren," said Mr. Little. Anyway, they fixed a place for her in the living room and they fed her and they gave her a cup of water. Soon she felt much better and she went hopping about the house, examining everything with the greatest care and interest. Presently, she hopped upstairs and into Stuart's room where he was lying in bed. "Hello," said Stuart. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" "My name is Margalo," said the bird softly in a very musical voice. "I come from field once tall with wheat, from pastures deep in fern and thistle. I come from vales of meadow sweet, and I love to whistle." Stuart sat bolt upright in the bed. "Say that again," he said. "I can't," replied Margalo. "I have a sore throat." "So do I," said Stuart. "I've got bronchitis. You better not get too near me. You might catch it." "Oh, I'll stay here right by the door," said Margalo. "You can use some of my gargle if you want to," said Stuart. "And here are some nose drops, and I have plenty of Kleenex." "Thank you very much. You're very kind," replied the bird. "Did they take your temperature?" asked Stuart, who was beginning to feel genuinely worried about his new friend's health. "No," said Margalo, "but I don't think it'll be necessary." "Well, we better make sure," said Stuart, "because I would hate to have anything to happen to you. Here." And he tossed her the thermometer. Margalo put it under her tongue, and she and Stuart sat very still for 3 minutes. And then she took it out, and she looked at it and turned it very carefully. "Normal," she announced. Stuart felt his heart leap for gladness. It seemed to him he had never seen any creature so beautiful as this tiny bird, and he already loved her. "I hope," he remarked, "that my parents have you fixed up with a decent place to sleep." Here's the picture of Margalo taking her temperature. That kind of makes me giggle. I don't think that's the way birds would take their temperature. I don't know how they would do it. "Oh, yes," Margalo replied. "I'm going to sleep in the Boston fern that's on the bookshelf in the living room. It's a very nice place for a city location. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I shall go to bed. I see it's getting dark outside. I always get to bed at sundown. Good night, sir." "Oh, please don't call me sir," cried Stuart. "Call me Stuart." "Very well," said the bird. "Good night, Stuart." And she hopped off with light bouncing steps. "Good night, Margalo," called Stuart. "See you in the morning." Stuart settled back under his bedclothes again. "Now there's a very mighty fine bird," he whispered, and he sighed a tender sigh. When Mrs. Little came in later to tuck Stuart in for the night and hear his prayers, Stuart asked her if she thought the bird would be quite safe sleeping downstairs in the living room. "Oh, she's quite safe, my dear," replied Mrs. Little. "But what about the cat, Snowbell?" asked Stuart sternly. "Oh, Snowbell wouldn't touch the bird," his mother said. "Now you go to sleep and forget all about it." Mrs. Little opened the window and turned out the light. Stuart closed his eyes and laid there in the dark, but he couldn't seem to go to sleep. He tossed and he turned, and his bedclothes got all rumpled. He kept thinking about the bird downstairs asleep in the fern, and he kept thinking about Snowbell and the way Snowbell's eyes gleamed. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, he switched on the light. "There's just something in me that doesn't trust a cat. I wonder why. I can't sleep knowing that Margalo might be in danger." Pushing the covers back, Stuart climbed out of bed. He put on his wrapper and his slippers. Taking his bow and arrow and his flashlight, he tiptoed out into the hall. Everyone else had gone to bed and the house was dark. Stuart found his way to the stairs and descended slowly and cautiously into the living room, making no noise. His throat hurt him, and he felt a little bit dizzy. "Sick as I am," he said to himself, "this has to be done." Being careful not to make a sound, he stole across to the lamp by the bookshelf. He shimmied up the cord and climbed out onto the shelf. There was a faint ray of light from the street lamp outside, and Stuart could dimly see Margalo asleep in the fern with her head tucked under her wing. "Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast," he whispered, repeating a speech that he had heard in the movies. Then he hid behind a candlestick and he waited, listening and watching. For half an hour he didn't see anything, he didn't hear anything but the faint ruffle of Margalo's wings when she stirred in her dream. The clock struck 10 loudly, and before the sound of the last stroke had died away, Stuart saw 2 gleaming yellow eyes peering out from behind the sofa. "So," thought Stuart, "I guess there's going to be something after all." He reached for his bow and arrow. The eyes came nearer. Stuart was frightened, but he was a brave mouse even when he had a sore throat. He placed the arrow against the cord of the bow and he waited. Snowbell crept softly towards the bookshelf and climbed noiselessly up into the chair within easy reach of the Boston fern where Margalo was asleep. Then he crouched, ready to spring. His tail waved back and forth, his eyes gleaming bright. Stuart decided that the time had come. He stepped out from behind the candlestick. He knelt down, bent his bow, and carefully took aim at Snowbell's left ear, which was the one nearest to him. "This is the finest thing I've ever done," thought Stuart. And then he shot the arrow straight into the cat's ear. Snowbell squealed with pain and jumped off and ran down towards the kitchen. "A direct hit," said Stuart. "Thank heavens. Well, there's a good night's work done, and he threw a kiss toward Margalo's sleeping form. It was a tired little mouse that crawled into bed a few minutes later. Tired, but ready for sleep at last. Okay, and there's the picture. You can see the fern, and there's Margalo asleep, and then there's Stuart with his bow and arrow, and Snowbell the cat. Wonder why Snowbell was sneaking up on her, and what made Stuart not trust Snowbell? Why did he think? Why did he have an uneasy feeling about him? Things to think about. So tomorrow we will read chapter 9. It's called A Narrow Escape.